Josh, welcome. I'm so excited to speak to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man.
It's really weird when you're a fan of a product and then you meet the founder. So I've been watching consuming Bigger Pockets for years, and you're the founder of that. So it feels good to get to know you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's great to hear. I love when I run across people who I never in a million years would have thought were fans of our product, and so it's always special, and I'm very appreciative to be here.
One of the reasons why I really like Bigger Pockets and why I wanted to bring you on the show, and I'm also just curious what you're up to these days, is Bigger Pockets is kind of like the OG community-based product. It's now like a very in style to wrap community around your product, and we talk a lot about it on this podcast. But for folks who don't know what Bigger Pockets is and why it's a community-based product, can you just explain what it is?
Sure. So Bigger Pockets, I founded 18 or so years ago. I was a new real estate investor trying to be successful, just looking for ways to make money on the side while working a full-time job, and I ran into all these problems. So when you buy a property as a landlord, you have no idea what you're going to face. You don't have a clue, and the books don't really tell you what you're going to run across. And so 18 years ago, I went out and said, hey, I'm smart enough. I graduated from college. I pretty reasonably intelligent human being. Let me go buy some rental property. It seems like it's pretty basic. And so I did that. I bought some property in the Midwest, and the numbers seemed to be very good. And I thought I was going to make a lot of money and provide a service at the same time and help people out and give them a nice, clean, comfortable place to live. But unfortunately, like I said, things happen, right? And so what do you do when you have a vacancy and somebody moves in and starts ripping all the copper out of the walls? Like that, they don't have a book for that. They don't answer that question. What do you do when the air conditioning compressors keep getting stolen? How do you handle that situation? What do you do when tenants are leaving piles and piles of trash in the back room? Again, more questions. And the only way I thought to get answers to those questions was to talk to other people. And so I had back in college, I started building websites, and I had this epiphany. Hey, what if there was a community around real estate investing? So I went and I looked, and there were actually communities, but the issue I had with those communities was I believed that they were all built around the upsell. They were all built around trying to, the community I felt wasn't pure. I felt like, if I asked a question, maybe I'd get an answer, but the answer was always going to be a lead in to some kind of sales pitch. Not only from the people who were running the communities, but also from the participants of the communities. And so for me, I just felt like I didn't feel like they offered the purity that I expected in a community. So I set out to build my own, started putting together resources that I thought would be helpful, just tools and resources that I could find, collate the information. And then I started to build a forum. Fast forward, I'll take you through it really, really fast, but fast forward 8 years later, I decided I was on total burnout from doing this completely by myself. In addition, with an outsource developer, hired my first employee year 8. By year 14, I had an exit to private equity, and I've been on the board for the last 4+ years now, helping our current CEO, who was my number 2 when I stepped down. And so we built a community. Today, I think it's 2.5, 3 million members. We built the most popular real estate podcast on iTunes, still a top 10 business show on iTunes. And then we built out multiple other podcasts and other categories related. We built up a book business. So I think we've now got 42, 45 titles. And we're one of the largest independent publishers. So Bigger Pockets is all things for folks who are looking to build wealth, specifically through real estate. And whether you've been doing it for 30 years or you've been doing it, just thinking about doing it, there's something there. There is a community of people to help you and be there to hold your hand.
And was that your vision from day one? Like from day one, did you envision books, podcasts, forums, or like what was your vision when you started this quote unquote pure?
There was no vision.
community?
No. So the vision was I'm failing. I'm done. Like I am failing. Yeah. I walked into one of my units and there was a hole in the kitchen floor. Like, not like a mouse hole, like a hole that a human could fall through. And so like it's absurd stuff that like, what do you do? So I needed help and I figured there had to be a way to bring everybody together. So that was the first vision, was like, let me bring people together to help me. It was totally selfish from day one. But what happened was, over time, little by little, very, very little by very, very little, people were actually answering questions. People were helping one another out. And I was like, oh, wait, this isn't just about me getting help. People are helping one another. Wow, this is cool. So, when I had that realization, I said, well, we've got to craft guidelines. We've got to craft rules around how this community is going to operate, because if we don't, we will become that which, I built this to be different from, right? And almost instantly, when people see an opportunity to do bad, they're going to do bad, unfortunately, right? And bad is not necessarily bad. Bad is just being opportunistic, right? So, very quickly we had people shilling and soliciting on the community, and bam, we had to create a rule for that. You can't do that. We had people doing all sorts of things. So, as we went along and as we learned, we crafted guidelines to help make the community safe. Really starting from, treat each other well. Don't be an asshole. We had a no asshole rule. And really, I think one of the coolest and most important things was, it doesn't, because when you run to pretty much any community, you'll see like the experienced guys always like, there'll be like a new question that comes out and they'll be like, well, have you gone and read, all the other forum questions? Have you searched? Don't be lazy, and sorry, but it's kind of a dick move in my view. Like maybe they did, maybe they missed it, maybe it didn't come through on search or whatever it was. Like, just answer the question, just be helpful, right? Or gently or kindly point somebody in the right direction instead of being snarky, right? So I wanted a place that felt good for me to be. I wanted a place that felt good for people to hang out on. And we got that and we built that. And it took a very long time. And I had lots and lots of other people in the space who, as they saw our success, would try and replicate it. But ultimately enforcing those rules is really hard. And you get a lot of people who push back against them. And, in order to be successful, you have to stand up for what's right. And that's what we did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, a lot of people have ideas for products or communities they want to build, and they get caught up with, okay, I need to have this feature and that feature, and I need this, and I need all the rules, and what you're saying, which I think is really important. One of the insights I'm getting from you is you don't need to have all the answers on day one. As long as you're open to, iterating, adding, changing, moving as you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, I started with like I'm going to get a little nerdy here, a PHP BB, open source forum built in PHP, and was modifying it to kind of have the design and features that I wanted, until I got to a point where I was like, oh, there's this really cool site called MySpace. And they built these profiles. Wow. Imagine having profiles in a forum community. Wait, let's do that. Right. And so what I did was I went from very narrow, and then I said, I'm going to try and kind of replicate all the features of what they've got, hired a team out of India, and I didn't know how to code. I was a hack, right? I didn't know how to code very well. And so I hired these guys, and they did what I told them and nothing more and nothing less. And that left me with a product that, had a lot of problems. They delivered it to me and it didn't work. And I could have just said, all right, well, I'm out of business. I spent all my money. And instead I said, well, let me go back to step one and let me start iterating. What's the next thing I want beyond just the community, the forum? Oh, profiles. Cool. So let's just create a basic profile, and then we added blog software, and then we added, all these other features to it. So to go back to two questions, I did not have this vision of like this big thing that came with time as I realized what was possible. And what's interesting about that is this, probably year three, maybe 3 or 4, I went and talked to a couple of venture capitalists in Denver where I was living about it, and asked them, hey, what do you think about this? What can we do with this? Or, is this something that is fundable? And they both told me to just shut it down. They said, this has no legs. There's no need for something like this. And, I was like, thank you very much. Went home, thought about it. I was like, these guys are wrong. They're completely wrong. Because I saw it. I saw the need. I saw the community. I saw and what they had done was they probably looked at like, hey, what is the current market of users for communities that are in real estate? And they're like, well, that's a small pile. Whereas I looked at it as, what is the market for people who want to grow their wealth? What is the market for people who don't love their job or would like some financial freedom? Wait, that's a huge market. We could target those people. We can market to those people, and we can really become something special. And that's what happened.
I also think, with community-based products like Bigger Pockets, it's not uncommon to sell those businesses for 8 or 9 figures, which is incredible and life-changing for those teams. But to venture capitalists who look at it and like, okay, I'm going to invest in like, I'm looking for $1 billion exits. Yeah. I'm looking for $1 billion exits. And it's kind of like, if you're listening to this and you're getting no's from VCs, it doesn't mean a lot of people assume you're getting a no from a VC means you don't have a viable business. And I think that's completely incorrect.
Absolutely.
You don't have a viable, you potentially don't have a viable venture scalable business, but maybe you don't even want a venture scalable business.
Correct. Yeah. And I never took a penny from anyone. I started with my $4 a month hosting, and that was the only money I ever applied into that business, was the first $4 and then the next $4 and the next $4. But like beyond that, I bootstrapped the entire thing, and it took which is why it took 8 years to hire my first employee. I struggled and suffered through a lot. I mean, building a community is very hard. Getting adoption is really, really hard. And one of the things I tend to rant about occasionally is everybody today has their own community. Hey, I've got my community. Join our community. Like, having a Facebook page is not a community. It's a Facebook page. Like, it's a social media profile. Like, to me, and again, I'm a bit of a purist on this stuff. A community isn't a community, even when you're interacting with your fans. That's not a community either. A community becomes a community, I believe, when you're interacting with your fans and they're interacting amongst themselves, unguided. They're starting conversations. They're talking about things between one another. I think that's the point at which you've got a community. And if we're going to go and look at how many communities actually exist out there, it's a very small number.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make is the difference between an audience and a community. And it really grinds my gears, honestly, is when I see people using the word community instead of audience. Yeah. It grinds my gears so much that like we developed a framework for like a test, basically, for testing what is a community. We call it the tribe test. So you basically need 5 things. Is there togetherness? Are there rituals? Is there member identity? Is there belonging? And to your point, do they engage with each other? Like, could you basically leave? Like you have a team working on Bigger Pockets, but assuming even the team left, right? Like Bigger Pockets people would still be posting about it, asking questions, answering questions. Like the momentum is hard to stop.
Correct.
With a community.
Yeah. I think a good judge, and by the way, I love those. I wish I knew those 5 rules back in the day. I realized that I had a community when I was able to bring on my first volunteer moderator. And then the next time that I realized that I had a community was when I didn't have to seed the questions, right? Like, hey, people are just asking their own questions. I think those were the 2 of the biggest moments for me when I was like, whoa, this thing's got legs. Like this could be unstoppable if we water the seeds a little bit.
Was there ever a point when you were managing the community and you're like, oh, this isn't worth it? Because you did mention how hard it is to actually build it. Like, were you ever on the edge and thinking about,
14 years until I left.
Right.
Look, I'll say the stuff for me that put me on the edge. I hated when people were fighting. I didn't like that, especially when like there's good members of the community, both of which you like, who are kind of at each other. And you're like, you guys, like, I want you to stick around, but if you keep doing this, you're gone. It's when they continue and you have to get rid of them. When you kick off your top poster and your next top poster and your next, when you throw those guys out of the community because suddenly their ego becomes so big that they think that they own the place. That's really stressful. When you get threats from people, that's really stressful. When you kick people out just for being, jerks, newbies, and, you get nasty grams, that's stressful. So, I think people don't give enough credit to community leadership, to community moderators, and outside of communities. Let's jump one level up to large scale social media. I mean, it is a unrelenting, unforgiving job to deal with people's bullshit. And people treat these people terribly. And the things that these people see who moderate, Facebook or Twitter or this other stuff, I mean, they're awful jobs. Absolutely awful jobs. People do it for the love. A lot of people do it for the love. But I think you have to have a certain kind of constitution to be able to deal with that. I'm too emotional personally. I recognize it. Like those things impact me. They hurt me. They affect me. But we built a team eventually, once we started to hire, we built a team of people who were absolute pros who love doing that stuff, who don't let that stuff get to them.
Right.
But again, for me, it was probably 9-10 years of being, the first line of defense against it. And it was brutal for me.
How important was the name Bigger Pockets to the success of the business? Like if it was called something else, do you think,
I think
it would be less successful?
I think it was an obstacle. I think it was. I think today it's synonymous. People get it, but it took a long time. There were a lot of better brands, so to speak, that emerged. Well, no, let me take that back. I think we had the best brand. We have the best brand. Like period. I think there were there were other sites whose names were directly related to real estate investing, right? And I think that's easier and more obvious, from many standpoints of like search engine optimization or whatever else it is. I think in terms of building a brand, I didn't want a brand that was unique to just real estate investing. I wanted something that said, hey, wait, bigger pocket. We all need bigger pockets, right? Everybody wants more money. Cool. So this could be appealing. So I take back my first statement. The brand kicks ass today. It was always a great name, but it was just difficult for me to build the momentum behind it. But once people saw it and heard about it, it caught on.
Here's why I like the brand name. So I find there's a few reasons actually. The first is when you say bigger pockets, you just envision bigger pockets with more money in it. Like you can see it. You can literally see it in your brain. You can see it. And I think you talked about like the lifestyle and the questions and stuff that you wanted, answered. And, a big reasons why you created this product in this whole world was because you did want bigger pockets. So it makes sense to call it Bigger Pockets. That's one reason.
Sure.
The second is, to your point, it's niche in the sense that like it's grow wealth, but it's not like the real estate, optimization community.com.
It's less obvious.
What I mean? Like it's less obvious. Yeah. Which is cool. Yeah. A less obvious name has challenges. So when you're less obvious, like people are kind of like, okay, why am I here? Right. But if you beat the activation energy of that, then you kind of win a lot of the time because you create that affinity and trust with the brand. So that's kind of, I feel like the hurdle that you pass.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, it doesn't matter what your name is. There's some bad ones, but mostly it's an uphill climb, right? Brand building is not easy. It takes a lot of work, a lot of, dare I say grind, but like grind hustle. It's a lot of, it's continuous and constant outreach. It's protection at any cost. For me, the brand Bigger Pockets was my baby. My number one job it wasn't to grow the brand. It wasn't to grow the business. It wasn't to make money. It was to build and grow the brand and protect that brand. And protecting it meant, again, kicking off the jerks. It meant making sure we represented something good, something that people can look up to. Something that I wanted I didn't want to be associated. Like, for example, if we had advertisers, we had tons of advertisers outreach to us who were more than willing to give me money, lots of money. And I turned many, many, many of them down because I felt like their product ran against the grain of what we were trying to do. I would not allow the kind of get rich quick guys to advertise. I wouldn't put up with them. I wouldn't even partner with companies who I thought might potentially damage the brand. So I sacrificed a lot of revenue short term. At one point, I remember I had an ad contract that somebody wanted, and it would have represented like 50. It was early, probably a year or two or three, but it would have represented like probably 40 to 60% of our total revenues. And I said, I can't do it. Which, again, seems kind of insane. But for me, at that point, I had this vision of like, hey, this brand, if we start associating, you are who you associate with. You are who you work with.
Yep, that's right.
And so I refused to do it. It took a little bit longer to get where I needed to get to, but when we got there, we had done it our way. We had done it without sacrifice, without sacrificing, who we were.
Right. Hold that thought 1 second. I'm just going to put on some lights. It's getting dark here. I'm in Miami.
Going to Miami.
There we go. There's a trend happening right now where creators are moving away from advertising. So Anthony Pompliano, who's a popular Bitcoin crypto guy, he's got like 1.7 million Twitter followers, a really popular podcast. I think he took advertising money from FTX. Mm-hmm. And obviously, where that ended up. So he came out a few weeks ago and he basically was like, hey, I'm no longer doing any advertising on any of my channels. And, he's going to monetize other ways. I saw recently he just announced he's doing an event and he charges tickets to go to the event, right? And he'll make money that way, right? So I think you're starting to see creators look at advertising and be like, it's short term, but I'd rather, a lot of them, especially with big audiences, are like, I'd rather just like build my own products, and sell them because I know what I'm selling. This
is not a new thing. We dealt with it back 15, 18 years ago. The with the podcast, when we launched the podcast, we certainly screened the advertisers on the podcast, but there was a difference between an advertiser and an endorsement, right? Like I don't think in hundreds and hundreds of episodes that I hosted the Bigger Pockets podcast, I don't think I ever did a single endorsement. And it wasn't because there weren't companies I was willing to endorse. There weren't companies that I was willing to endorse who at the time wanted to advertise with us. Right. And so we were more than happy to allow somebody to put an ad up, but I wasn't going to read it. I wasn't going to say, oh, and by the way, I love that product, blah, blah, blah. Like there is so much selling out being done across the board in media and social media and magazines. And I mean, you name it, we had, when we put out, one of our first books, we reached out to a very big name in real estate, and their response was, yeah, I'll endorse it. Just tell me what to say and I'll say it. Like, are you not going to read it? Are you not going to look at it? No. Okay. So I'm getting a BS endorsement from you just because you want your name associated with our brand. No, I'm not going to do it. So again, we turned this name down, which I think would have potentially been helpful to our selling, but it didn't feel right to me. Over the years, magazines, man, pay for play is present. Magazines are all dying now, but pay for play, man, was a big, big thing in paper magazines for a long time. I'm sure it is in a lot of other spaces now still, but this stuff has been going on for a very long time. And I think it's wise of him and anyone else to secure their brand a little bit better. Yeah, the FTX blowback on a lot of celebrities. I mean, it's big. It's nasty. So like, I think it's cool. Look, I think I used to say, like, if Dunkin' Donuts is looking to advertise, like, come on in. I will endorse the shit out of that Dunkin' Donuts. You get me some products that I like, that I use, I will endorse them all day, because I know the brand, I understand their brand, and I'm not willing. I know they're not going to do anything that could jeopardize my name, my brand, and so people should definitely be careful and building their own products and other means for monetization is smart. I mean, we did it. We did it to Google proof ourselves, because in the early days, the first ads that I was able to get on the platform were these text link ads. Um, they don't even exist today because, Google thinks they're manipulative, and they are, to be fair. um, but like, back then that was like how we made money. We didn't know I couldn't make money any other way. That was the first way of doing it. And they said, all right, anybody who's got text link ads, we're going to smack them down in search results. And they did. I chose the money because I needed it to survive. And I was like, oh my God, this big company, Google, owns me. That's not good. I can't be owned by anybody. I've got to figure out another way. And so that's why we launched a podcast. That's why we built out a book business. That's why I did a conference in 2014, by myself. Yeah, and the team now does one annually. But and that's why we built memberships and things like that. Ultimately, it was to protect us against one stream of revenue, to protect us in case Google or Bing or whomever else smacks us down from search engines, whatever. I think early on it's harder to do, but as you grow, you have to think about those things.
A lot of people ask me, Greg, how do you build products that foster community? Well, I've got good news. That's exactly what Late Checkout does, my company. We partner with the largest brands in the world and fast-paced startups to design products that resonate with your community. We add a couple interesting clients every single year. So if you're interested and that sounds like you, email frontdesk@latecheckout.studio with what you're working on, what you need help with, and don't forget to mention the Where It Happens pod. Thank you. Yeah, and I think the other thing that's changed is it's now so much cheaper to build stuff digitally, right? Okay. So, if you're creating a platform, either a community platform or you're a creator building an audience and you're thinking about advertising, it's like, what if you put your energy in actually building a digital product, which you probably could launch in a day or 2 days or 3 days. And then the other thing is there's global talent to help fulfill and support it, right? Like you can, you don't need your customer support agents in New York City. Yeah. Like they could be in Iowa, right, for example.
Or the Philippines, and you can go find them. Anywhere else,
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a huge trend that's only going to accelerate. And what you're going to see is the speed of people creating, mostly I think digital products, like creators creating digital products is going to get accelerated.
Well, I mean, here's an example. Like let's go like niche. I thought real estate investing was niche, but we're gonna go like hyper niche here. My brother, he is a electrical engineer by trade, and he discovered that these old expired patents on using electricity to improve crop growth and crop yield, so speed of growth and yield. And so, he found this thing. He's like, oh, this is really cool. And for years was experimenting and playing around. And he actually ended up doing this thing with the university, a test, and saw that it actually worked. And then he was doing, basement experiments, seeing that this worked. And So, he's iterated various versions of like, I'm going to launch, I'm going to become this company that helps pot businesses increase their yields. He's tried all these different things, but ultimately he ended up writing a a book, right? He wrote it like an ebook, and had struggled selling it for a long time until, I don't know, a year and a half ago, he launched a Facebook group for electrical fertilizer. I think the electric fertilizer, whatever it was called, it is called. And it was like this slow kind of, same with what I dealt with, very, very slow going. But I talked to him like a couple, maybe a month and a half ago, and he's like, yeah, I'm at 3,000 members. We're starting to sell some books finally. It's pretty exciting. Then I talked to him like 3 weeks ago, and he's like, we're at 6,000 members. Like, I'm selling a lot now. Holy cow. I talked to him last week, not even this week. It was a couple days ago. He hit 10,000 members. He hit 10,000 members, and he's starting to sell enough product. I mean, it doesn't replace his salary yet, but it's a really nice supplement and really makes their lives a lot easier by having that money coming in. And so, if you could build a community in electrification of ag, these, and what's cool is like all the people in his little community are like coming up with different prototypes for their own products and how they use them to make their corn or lima beans get bigger. I mean, it's super cool, and anybody can do it if he's doing it. Is what I'm saying. Not because he's not smart. It's just because it's so hyper niche, and he's very smart, by the way. It's hyper niche.
Yeah, you said something in the beginning of this pod that I really connected with, which is you said, you basically were like, if you don't have a book for that, there's an opportunity. Like you said, you created Bigger Pockets because there was no book on answering XYZ questions. And the same with your brother, right? There's no book on answering XYZ questions. That's why he created that community. I think that, if you're in a space where there's no book for XYZ, you're onto something.
Yeah.
And
you don't mean a veritable book. You don't mean a proper book.
No.
Because
no.
A book means like
a metaphorical book.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm talking about a metaphorical book. I'm talking about like, if you can't find your answers to your questions easily, then there's an opportunity there. I had someone on the pod recently, two people actually, these guys, Nicholas Cole and Dickie Bush, and they're making 7 figures from their community and online course business, which focuses on teaching people how to write. And he talked about how he was like, yeah, I could have created a community or a course on writing, but then I would have competed with everyone else. So we only focus on start writing. It's for people who don't write, who want to start. And then we create products, services, community for that. That's it.
Yeah. Think about how hyper niche it is. But here's how that's going to play out, by the way. I don't know those guys, but I follow them on Twitter. At least how I see it play out. They're going to start to become successful. They are already, it looks like, successful in what they're doing. Ultimately, they will have, as they grow their community, they'll have the opportunity to expand they may choose not to, but they have that opportunity to expand. Oh, okay, now you're started. Cool. Now we can do intermediate writing, and then we can do advanced writing. But if you go too broad, I made the mistake of at one point going too broad. And year 8, I discovered it because I said, hey, Bigger Pockets is going to be everything for everyone real estate. And suddenly, I stopped focusing specifically on investors and started focusing on, consumers, mom and pop buyers, and the product kind of lost its ability to be differentiated. And so went back to the roots and said, all right, this is really going to be hyper focused on investors and those people within the community, right? So that's agents, lenders, contractors, you name it. All those folks are part of that world, and regained what little momentum we had lost from kind of losing our way a little bit.
How did you know that you lost momentum? Was it a feeling that you had, or were people shouting and screaming, "Hey, like what's going on?"
10,000 hour rule. It was, you can't point to what it was exactly, but you've put enough reps in that you can spot it.
Mm-hmm. So for for people who don't know, 10,000 hour rule is basically you become an expert. Who is it? Malcolm Gladwell?
I think it was Gladwell. Yeah.
Yeah. Malcolm Gladwell said that if you put your attention to something for 10,000 hours or more, you become an expert. And I think I'll challenge Malcolm Gladwell, and I'll say,
ooh, challenge.
Yeah, challenge. Exactly. I'm going to say that if you put 10,000 hours or more, you build intuition.
Yeah. I think that's, I love that. I love that. Yeah. I remember hearing, a few months ago, somebody was telling a story about police. They were looking at the difference between bomb squad guys who were new and bomb squad guys who've been doing it forever. I think it was bomb squad guys, and they were able, the guys who had been doing it forever couldn't point out what it was about potential perps when they put them through this test to see could they identify who the bad guys were, but they just knew when they watched these guys who was going to be a troublemaker. May not be the best example here, but ultimately that intuition guides you, I think, over time. And for me, I'd spent so much time in the community building this forum, building the social network. It just felt like something had changed, something had shifted, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And so we went back to our core.
The cool thing about you in Bigger Pockets is you weren't an expert when you weren't like a real estate expert when you started this, right?
No. And I always felt imposter syndrome. I always felt like I had an imposter syndrome, and I had a lot of people challenge me. They're like, "Who the hell are you to be talking about real estate?" And I was like, "I'm not the expert. I'm the guy who brings everybody together. I'm the community, the guy who builds the community." And I would always use Cuban as my example. I'd say, Mark Cuban was never an NBA player, but he can own an NBA team and successfully run that business. I got my hands dirty in real estate investing, and I realized there was a need for this community. I was simultaneously running the community and investing, and I realized that I could not do both successfully. For me to be successful at something, I have to give 100%, 1,000%. And so I couldn't give 1,000% to Bigger Pockets and real estate investing. And I picked the online platform because, frankly, I thought it was more fun and more of a challenge. I think, how many, there's millions of real estate investors. How many people are building really cool communities? Not a lot, at least back then.
Yeah, exactly. No, and now too, I think cool communities really just means a community where people can nerd out and get a lot of value.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to create, if you're listening to this, and you want to create a community, you don't need to be an expert. I'll give you an example. So, I have a lot of people on my team who are AI experts. I would consider myself an AI expert. I'm a product expert, but I'm an AI expert. So I tweeted out, "Hey, is anyone interested in joining a free community for people who want to use AI to boost productivity?" Frankly, selfishly, because I want to boost productivity and I want to do it with other people. And I, set this community up. Didn't really, tweeted it, basically went to sleep, woke up the next day, and all of a sudden there's like almost 10,000 people who want to join.
Wow. It's hot.
It turns out there's no book for AI and productivity. Let's put it that way. So came up with a name on the spot. You probably need a robot.com.
I like it.
And now it's starting. Yeah. And people are talking in the community, and I'm learning, and I'm putting in my reps, and I'm researching, and I'm sharing what I'm learning, and I don't have it all figured out with this community because I'm still learning. But yeah, my point is, you don't need to be an expert, and you just got to get started.
Well, that was one of the cool things about our show, our podcast, is still right. But back when we started, I wasn't this guy who had done hundreds of deals, dozens of deals. Like I had very small number of deals under my belt, but I was really inquisitive, and I was able to ask questions, and I later started my own podcast called Undeniably Curious. So, like I am undeniably curious, right? So I ended up, being able, I'm good at channeling people's questions. I'm good at asking people questions, and channeling these answers, and really taking the conversation to a place where other people can learn from it. And there's a need for that. Right. There's a demand for that. And that comes in the form of whether it's hosting a pod or running a community, and again, what happened over time is when I, after dozens and dozens or hundreds of shows, I knew the answers because I had talked to the experts. I had one-on-one, experience with all these experts, and academically, at least, I was one of the top guys out there. Right now, in practicality, was I? No, but academically, absolutely. And you could have put me up against anyone, and I would have been able to go head to head.
Well, I think it's also one of the reasons why you were probably confident then is because if you're building a community, it's really hand-to-hand combat of like convincing people and speaking to people, and it's like a one-by-one game, basically. And through that, it's really the best way to learn. Like if you want to learn any topic, like start a community about said topic.
Yeah. I over the 14 years that I was, actively running Bigger Pockets, I talked to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, about real estate. Either directly in person at events, either out on the street and about, by email, by social media on our platform. It, like you said, every single eyeball counted, whether it was guest posting on somebody else's site, whether it was going in other communities, ancillary. I thought there was kind of a gentleman's agreement. At least I had my own gentleman's agreement where I would never go onto a competitive platform and shill for our platform. I thought it was just bad taste, bad form. But I would go in like a personal finance site and certainly talk about who we were and what we were doing. But it was, it's one by one, especially in the early days. And if you're not as, kick ass as we all need a robot.com or whatever it was with Greg here, 10K members is no joke in no time. Like, I don't think I had 10,000 members for maybe 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah. I think the other difference between now and then is with social, and having, how big these platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever, you can really get to scale quickly. Like there's people on, TikTok, I've been doing some research because of you probably need a robot community. Like there's these AI influencers on TikTok that have 120,000 followers, 150,000 followers. There's this guy, like I was just looking at Justin Feinberg.
Yeah.
And he just talks about chat GPT prompts, and he just like, that's what he does. And it's like, he got to 150,000 followers. Chat GPT is like what, 2 months, a couple months old,
100 million.
right? Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So the scale, that's another cool, we talked about like no code and the ability to build quickly, but also just social platforms being able to distribute quickly is huge.
Yeah. And the ability to build, what's crazy is, we had talked about, the pure form, the pure name of community, right? Like, is me having a social profile on Instagram a community, or me having a social profile on Twitter a community? I think there's some semblance of it. I think I have somewhat of a community still on Twitter, where people know each other, they're interacting. I interact with, in various communities on Twitter and other places, but like that ability, take Beast, right? That dude is arguably one of the most powerful people on planet Earth. Like, seriously, this guy can do anything because his audience is so big. And he's pretty cool about it. He's not abusing it. There are other people whose names I won't mention who have massive, massive audiences who have completely let, that go to their heads and think they're untouchable, infallible, and, do a lot of dumb things all the time. And so, but that power in audience allows you to, they can take that community and use it for good or for evil. Right. And I think, especially today, it's a trip, man, just looking at how people can kind of set their army of followers to do all kinds of things, again, good and bad.
Yeah. On the Mr. Beast thing, Mr. Beast regularly gets more Twitter likes than the president of the United States.
That's crazy.
Regularly.
It's crazy.
So I think if you build a lot of affinity and trust with your audience, then to your point, like, you can get them to do things.
Yeah.
You can get them to show up. The reason why, there's that famous picture now of all the people who went to Mr. Beast's grand opening of Beast Burger in this mall. Like, the reason you can get thousands of people to show up, I don't know where it was, in like North Carolina, is like because of all the goodwill that he's built over the last 8 years or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's wild. So I think there is something though, like, the people who are listening right now, there's probably people who have a community of one, right? Their mom or their girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, right? And I guess what I want to say to those people is, like, it's really easy to look at like Mr. Beast and say, oh, well, I'll never do that. I shouldn't even start. Right. I've spoken to, lots of people who would be startup founders. And what I always found interesting was, like, to a large portion of them, they would not be successful if they did not have $1 billion business. Right. And if you look at the numbers, you're like, there's a reason they call that a unicorn, right? Very few people get there. If you have a business that's a $5 million business, with 20% margins, and you own 100%, you're making $1 million a year. You don't need a 10 million, a 20, a 50, a 100, a 500 million, a billion. You don't need that, and we get so caught up in this FOMO and this comparison world that we're in, thanks to social, that, we've lost our minds when it comes to what is actual success. Like, most people would be really happy, making $1 million a year and, like, having a pretty good life. Like that's not bad. That's a really good way to raise your family and go about living. I mean, $1 million is a hell of a lot of money to spend every year. But if you're comparing yourself to the $1 billion business, the 500, like suddenly, you're like, oh, this sucks. But if you take a second and pause, wait, that's not bad. So to be able to, like, if you're a founder and thinking about starting a business, like, get some perspective and like stop competing with the guys at the elite. Stop competing with the 1%. It's just going to drive you crazy. And the same with lifestyle bloat and community. Like I talked about my brother, right? Okay, he's got 10,000 members. I don't know how much money he's making, but if he's making, a couple $1,000 a month, even like, and the community is kind of self-operating, wait a second, that's pretty good for the effort that he put in. And maybe he'll launch another product and maybe he'll get 5 or 10,000 members. Maybe he'll get 2,000, maybe he'll get 100, whatever it is, right? Pivot and try again, right? Like I encourage everyone to have some perspective because we are way too busy these days comparing ourselves to the biggest and the best, so to speak. And it's really easy to think that you're a failure when you're competing against these just enormous odds. Beast, I mean, it's an anomaly. Like unicorns are anomalies. These massive followings, they're anomalies. The average people don't have those numbers. So stop competing with these anomalies. I think it'll make you a lot more sane, and frankly, it'll hopefully lead to a happier life.
I was talking with one of the top YouTubers in the world, and he also manages other YouTubers, and he told me Mr. Beast is such an anomaly. If I saw him, let's say in 2008 or 2009 when he started, and you would have told me that this was his genre of videos that he was going to create, I would have told you with 100% certainty that this would not work.
Right.
And I think the other thing about communities and audiences is that you never know if it's going to work or not, really. Like you can have a good, I might think like you probably need a robot, might work. But you never know. You literally never know. And so I think like to your point, it's kind of just like get going.
Yeah.
Get
started. Yeah. Well, you're a product guy. I mean, like I think about some of the ideas that I tried as a part of Bigger Pockets over the years. Yeah. Some of the products I tried to launch. And there were things where my audience literally straight up told me like, oh yeah, we will pay for this. We'd love this. This is amazing. And they didn't, and they wouldn't, and it's a big learn. That was a huge lesson for me was, audience testing is to be taken with a grain of salt, until somebody gives you money, you can't count on what they say. What people say and what they actually do aren't always going to be the same thing. So, that's where that intuition also comes in, right? You've got to kind of go with your gut on a lot of that.
A lot of people say I'm data driven. And what I say to them is you don't want to be data driven. You actually want to be data informed.
Yeah.
You don't want the data to dictate you, because if you look at the data, it might say like, hey, go build this thing. And then you go build it, and it's like 1% of people actually buy it. Let the data inform you. Let the intuition drive you.
Yeah. But the problem with that though goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is like you don't have intuition if you haven't been doing it for a while. So how do you know where, Greg? How do you know where to start? Like I can't use data. I can't do this. So like
that's right.
That is the challenge, right? And my answer to that's going to be just try it.
Be a curious idiot is the answer. Because why be a curious idiot? Be an idiot because don't know the answers. Be the person who wants answers, and be curious, meaning you're not going to be able to fall asleep tonight unless you find that answer.
Yeah. And stop being worried about failing. I mean, like, we all fail. It's one of the questions I ask my kids at night. I forget where I heard it from, but like we do it almost every night, is like, all right, how was this? How was that? And cool. What'd you fail at today? Oh, you failed at that. Cool. What'd you learn from it? Cool. Like,
right.
We have to fail. You have to fail to be successful. And you have to be willing to take chances in order to get anywhere in life. At least I believe so. You really have to take those risks. If you avoid risks your whole life, you're just going to follow the predescribed idea of what everyone does, which is get up, go to a job that you hate, come home, go back to work, spend Sundays, Friday is TGIF because, you hate your job. You don't want to go, you can't wait for the weekend. And then Sunday sucks because you're thinking about Monday, right? Like, a lot of people live their life exactly like that. And I believe a lot of that comes from fear of taking chances, taking chances, leaving that job that you've had security with for so long, or trying that thing that you've always wanted to try. Doing things that you're afraid of is what helps you grow.
When you started Bigger Pockets, were you working another full-time job?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I started, when I started Bigger Pockets, I was teaching special ed in Los Angeles as a full-time job. At first it was, I was kind of, a little bit of time here and there. And then I became obsessed, and every single break I was doing Bigger Pockets. Nights, weekends, I was doing Bigger Pockets. I am I'm a cautionary tale, I think, as well, because I believe I did too much. To be honest, I was working 100-hour weeks for 8 years. There was a 8-year period where I never did not work on my company. When I went on vacation, I actually didn't go on vacation. I traveled. When I traveled, I had my computer, and everyone, my friends and family, all gave me crap about it. They're like, dude, you need to not work. And I'm like, well, I have to work. This is, and it wasn't true. It wasn't true. I was a victim to my own kind of hustle grind kind of idea of like, if I'm not working harder than everyone else, I'm going to fail. I would have been fine if I had worked a little less hard, to be honest, but you do have to put the time in. You definitely have to put the time in. But yeah, it's interesting.
And what do you do now? Bigger Pockets, is sort of in the past. Like, how do you spend your time now?
That's a great question. I'm still working on that. No, so I'm on the board of Bigger Pockets. I'm an advisor to a couple other startups. I invest in tech startups. I invest in real estate opportunities. I'm always looking for like investment opportunities, small businesses, things like that sound interesting. I love the advisory. I really love helping people where I can, because I've put in the 10,000 hours in so many different verticals in order to build a successful startup that went to exit. That, whether it's community, content, you name it, initial scale, product. These are things I'm really good at. So I'm toying with writing a book, kind of on my life, just because I've had a really interesting life. We all have stories to tell, right? I've been focused the last few years on health, spending a lot of time and energy on my health, and studying of that's been really fascinating, fun to learn about just longevity and biohacking stuff. I'm not one of the extreme guys, but I think each step is a step in the right direction. I love surfing. I love playing tennis. I love just kind of getting out. We live in Maui, so just exploring and having fun. And really, my primary focus is my family. I've got 3 kids, three girls, and um, an amazing wife. And my job is to make sure that they have the best lives that they can have for themselves. Because, in that period I talked about, the 100-hour weeks, I had babies back then. I was around, but I wasn't around, right? I wasn't working in an office when I was doing that. I was working out of the bedroom or whatever it was. But like, I was in the room, but I wasn't present for my kids. And I regret that. For me, I've had this epiphany. Life is short. Anything can happen tomorrow, and so I want to make sure I live my life with no regrets for my family specifically. But yeah, looking for opportunities and just trying to have fun.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to like this episode because I think how you build bigger pockets is could be applied to a million verticals. And so I think a lot of the lessons you learned along the way, people could apply that. I think also you had a period of your life where you were grinding, 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 and now you have a period of life which sounds like you're a lot more balanced in terms of work and family and friends. So I think that always puts things into perspective for people. It's very hard. A lot of people listening to this podcast are more, I think, on the work really hard because they're trying to, make something. That's why you're listening here. But I'm also a big believer in like balance is really important. So I like that you bring that up.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, for me, I will tell you the reason I ultimately had my exit. We had this trauma happen to one of my kids, and it just, I mean, it hit me like Mike Tyson shot might have felt to somebody. I mean, it was a wake up call, and also in the year prior, I'd had multiple panic attacks, and the panic attacks were like, I had to grow this company. I got to grow this company. It's got to be more successful. Like I had a really successful business at that point, but like I was doing exactly what I told you guys not to do because I learned it through through taking the blows. Right? I mean, it was brutal. Like panic attack. I had a panic attack about this job at this company that I love. That's crazy. Right? Like
Totally.
What is that? So like, I don't wish that on anyone. It's terrifying to go through. And so I had this realization that I love my company, but I didn't any longer need to keep being the guy running it. I didn't need to deal with the stresses that kind of came with that. And at that point I had enough, right? Like we were doing well. Like we as long as we aren't stupid, we'll be okay. And so like, you know what? Let me step down. I don't need a $1 billion business, $1 trillion. Like who again?
Who needs it?
Who needs that? Like I need. Yeah. I want to be with my family. I want to be with my friends, and I want to be happy and live a chill life.
It's all about leverage. I think leverage. Naval Ravikant from Angels talks a lot about leverage and how you can use media for leverage, connections for leverage, capital for leverage. So I think it's about building leverage in your life. And once you have that leverage, you don't need to work 100 hours a week. Josh, I gotta run, but where could people follow you on the internet if they want to follow your, to get more of you?
Sure. My website's joshuadorkin.com. I'm at JR Dorkin on Twitter. Just look me up. I'm all over the place. I'm on Facebook. Twitter is really the only place that I actively really participate, but LinkedIn, I'm out there. But yeah, man. Hey, listen, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully the listeners found all this stuff helpful.
They will, 100%. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Greg.
Amazing.